Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Ixban Wash Process Guatemala from Kuma Coffee. And there's the bag right there. And Kuma, based out of Seattle, Washington. And they're a coffee roaster that has appeared on this channel multiple times before, including in our most recent coffee roaster tier list, where, interestingly enough, you guys felt that we were underrating them a little bit. And that's actually a really good thing to hear, because I definitely consider them to be one of the better locally based coffee roasters. If there's one thing about them that's been a little bit of a sticking point for me for the years that I have been drinking them, it's that their coffee has been a little too consistent. And what I mean by that is you pretty much know what to expect anytime you pick up one of their bags of coffee or anytime you try one of their cups of coffee. And you do have to give credit to a coffee roaster for being able to remain consistent for as long as they have. Why it's a sticking point to me is oftentimes I'm looking for something a little bit more innovative or something to surprise me, and that's not necessarily Kuma's forte. But every time they do release something that does sound a little interesting to me, it's something I do like to go out and try. And this one definitely sounded very much like my type of coffee, so I figured it would be a pretty nice review. Looking forward to discussing it, as this right here is day 21. And recipe we went with for this coffee was Kuma's recipe, which is a 16.67 to 1 water to coffee ratio brewed at 205 degrees Fahrenheit. I like this one best through the Chemex, which indicates a more medium grind. Now, roast profile for Kuma, traditionally Pacific Northwest coffee as a whole tends to be a little bit more developed than even most coffees around the rest of the United States. This I oftentimes kind of align with a little bit more developed version of a sweet bloom coffee. With that being said, this is lighter than pretty much every other Kuma coffee I've had or reviewed, so even then it's still a little bit more developed than sweet bloom coffees, but on the lighter side of what you might expect from a Kuma coffee. With all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. So day 6, first impression, and the cup was slightly lighter than initially expected. So I think that's why I'm kind of highlighting that, because as mentioned, they can be a little bit more on the developed side sometimes, but it had this mostly sugary base to it. Slightly herbal, both in the floral sense as well as it seems to skew a little bit more on the herbal side of things as well. There is a delicate and subtle chocolate component to this cup, but for the most part, it left a pretty positive start, definitely room to grow. Day 7, almost an entirely different cup when brewed through the V60, as there was a little bit more brightness, both in terms of the stone fruit acidity as well as in the floral aspect, all continuously complemented by the sugary sweetness. So this was another nice cup of coffee. But on day 9, we went back to the Chemex, and I noticed that that brightness was also on the forefront of this brew method, so I think the coffee just needed to be open and let a little bit of air inside, because the sugary sweetness was very much on the forefront on this day with a slight herbal component to it, but mostly skewing on the sugary side of things. We're thinking sugary fruits as well as sugary sweetness in general. Day 11, another V60 day, and much more of the brightness yet again, as it continues to improve with each cup. I think that with each day you're seeing a nice little bit of increase in the overall just vibrancy of this coffee. Nothing overly defined, and that's a consistent theme, is that I would never say there was a specifically overly defined flavor profile in this coffee, just more of a sugary sweetness, a sugary aspect to it. And I think they have a brown sugar note listed on here, which does make perfect sense because that was very prominent throughout. Overall, still a pretty nice cup of coffee. We continue on to day 13, as there's a slight improvement yet again. Feeling a bit of the herbality and florality in the forefront of the coffee on this day, as the listed lilac that they have on here feels quite apt. I felt hibiscus would work as well. I oftentimes align any sort of herbal red florality to the hibiscus, but in addition to that, slight nutty and chocolatey aspects, again, very slight, very kind of tame in the background, in addition to a sugariness that remains on the forefront, still the most defined characteristic. I'm gonna reset this. All right, day 15, best day of the coffee to this point, as the sugary aspect has greatly increased with the overall sweetness in the cup in a much higher abundance. Temperatures and ratio have really helped the herbal florality within the cup, as it is also pronounced. The cup continues to be improving, and the vibrancy just as a whole is the key factor in this, because each day just getting a little bit more vibrant. Day 17, still room for the coffee to grow, as the sugary sweetness is present yet again in the cup, even a slight bit of this caramelized aspect. That's something I've started to see within the last couple of days, was a little bit more of the caramelized aspect. Mildly herbal, with the secondary floral component being the, well, secondary most thing in this cup of coffee, while remaining, I listed on here moderately sweet, but we'll say on the higher side of moderately sweet. Day 19 final notes, we have continued improvements to the cup, as this time it's slightly reminiscent of that popcorn florality I oftentimes list, which, what's the word I'm looking for? Honeysuckle. So it reminded me a little bit of that, but actually, if I'm being a little bit more specific, it reminded me of kettle corn, because it had this kind of like caramelized florality. And that's at the start of the cup when it's at warmer temperatures. As it does cool down, the fruit factors become the much more pronounced characteristics to it, all encompassed by that sugary sweetness that continues to remain present and prominent as the actual flavor profile continues to skew on that sugary and floral side of things in general. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we were getting. All right, and 4 level 4s. So let's go through those real quick. The cleanliness, level 4. Yeah, I think that's pretty standard. It's very much what you would expect. That's Kuma's coffees in general. They tend to be pretty clean, and that's something that I've always given them credit for. So this one's no exception. I like the clarity in this coffee. So right there at the level 4 mark, not too much to say on it. Finish, level 4. Yeah, I've been alluding to the sugary sweetness, but in addition to that, it does have a slight bit of that floral and herbal finish to it as well. That's somewhat secondary to the sugary sweetness. I think that's why the flavor profile in this coffee really tends to skew on those two things, because that's very pronounced in the finish. It's in the early stages of the cup, but you very much feel them in the finish too. Sweetness, level 4. Yeah, this is easily one of the sweeter Kuma coffees I've ever had, especially for a washed coffee. So I really like the sweetness in this. Maybe it's a little generous to go on the 4, maybe on the slightly lower side of the 4, but I'm happy with it at that mark. I would have felt less happy with it at the 3, so we'll stick with it there at that 4. Florality, level 4. I've been pointing at the fact that this is the second most dominant factor in this coffee, so that one definitely justifies the 4. I would say towards the end, it's getting even more vibrant. I don't think it would ever or has the potential to reach a level 5. I don't think anything in a Kuma coffee, for the most part, other than natural coffees, tends to have level 5 potential, but level 4 for the florality, I think, is really, really good. A couple of level 3s, so the body level 3, even when brewed through the Chemex, it does have a fair bit of body. It is a Guatemalan coffee, so I think that would make a lot of sense. The acidity, level 3, yeah, I have been kind of pointing at that in the earlier days. It hasn't always been the most dominant acidity. I feel like even then it's on a kind of more moderate level 3, so you could even be on the lower side of level 3, but I really like the way that these are charted, because I think level 3 is perfect for this coffee too. Stone fruit, level 3. I believe that they have a peach note list on here. Wasn't getting too much of that. It was maybe a little bit in the acidity side of things, but never anything too pronounced in terms of a defined stone fruit characteristic to it. Still level 3, mostly because this cup as a whole is a little bit more tame, moderate. Chocolate level 3, yeah, it is a Central American coffee that is pretty much in line with expectations. Even then, it was definitely on the more like milk chocolate, lighter chocolate side of things. And then the caramel at level 3, which is something I've definitely seen increase over these last couple of days, and I feel like it might continue to increase with a little bit more time, so definitely justified there. Everything else at least reaches a level 2 mark, so there's at least a little bit of everything in this tasting wheel, which makes it a well-balanced, well-rounded tasting wheel. So I like the way that it looks. I think it's a pretty nice representation of what I got from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee, I would say that this is actually one of my favorite Kuma coffees, so I think they did a really nice job of this one. This is very much just a Guatemalan, a washed Guatemalan, one of those that you get and you're like, okay, this is a pretty good cup of coffee. So I enjoyed it for that aspect. It's not anything that wowed me, but that's kind of what I've been saying about Kuma since the start of this review, is that their coffees, you know what to expect. This one was very much what I expected, and as a result, I think it's delivered. It's not going to be anything that will make a top 10 list or something that I will discuss heavily in the future, but for the most part, I think it's, well, just nice. The type of person I would suggest this coffee to, if you do like this specific sort of, I don't know how you'd say it, just consistent cup of coffee, because it has been consistent with sugary sweetness, clarity, like, without saying that it's a Central American coffee that remains consistent right from start to finish, very much in line with expectations. That's kind of what I'm hinting at. This coffee is very much what you would expect for a light medium American coffee that has peach, lilac, and brown sugar flavor notes to it, all clean and moderately done. Then this is exactly what the coffee is. So it's everything you would expect it to be going into it, and that's kind of the direction I can point you towards for this one, and that's kind of the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee or anything from Kuma, I would love to know your thoughts and impressions of it or them as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Ixban Wash Process Guatemala from Kuma Coffee. Thank you for watching.